Hello and welcome to the CFM Digital Badging Project, Introduction to Level 2, Drivers of Change. In this short introductory video, I'm going to give you an overview of what we're covering in this level, and this will be 4 assignments that will result in you earning your Forecaster Badge. One of the purposes of strategic foresight is to get organizations and individuals thinking in a longer time frame. There are several different horizons of time, and the short-term horizon, 1 to 3 years or so, is usually the horizon within which museums are planning. So if you look at a museum's strategic plan or institutional plan, typically it covers 1 to 3 years, sometimes 5. That's the here and now. That's what you're planning to do in the immediate future. In addition to that, many organizations have the prescience to look out 3 to 7 years, maybe 10 years, to have their eye on some longer-term goal. That might be an overall plan for their campus. It might be the establishment of an endowment. What we find to be very rare is finding organizations that are really putting their planning in a much longer term context, looking beyond 7 or 10 years, looking in a 25 or 50-year time frame, which is pretty strange when you think about it, because if you talk to museum staff and you say, what are your ambitions for example, preserving your collections, which is usually one of the core pieces of a museum's mission if they're a collecting institution, and they'll say, oh, we want to preserve it forever. And if I say, well, okay, that's a little unrealistic if you think about geologic time. I don't know if you can expect to keep this stuff for millions of years. Give me a time frame. If you push them, they'll often say something between 100 to 500 years. Well, why would you expect you're going to be able to accomplish that if you haven't even thought about what it would take to preserve them for 100 or 500 years? What are the forces that you're going to be contending with? What would the world be like in 105 or 500 years? Now, that's a particularly long time frame, and I bring it up in the context of conservation. But the fact is, most museums ought to be thinking about a 25 to 50-year time frame to know what they're going to have to deal with in the future. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons that the American Alliance of Museums founded the Center for the Future of Museums is we noticed a pattern among museums going through our excellence programs, accreditation, the museum assessment program, that they could come through repeatedly, and every time they would present their peer reviewers with their institutional plan covering 2 or 3 years, and that plan might look really credible. It's got all the things a plan should have. It has action steps, it has assignments of responsibility, it has a budget. And at the time, the peer reviewers would say, looks good to us, good plan. Even though the museum might have underlying challenges like a stable financial base or a shrinking audience that were threatening its existence, they would say the plan looks like it's going to take care of this. And yet that same museum might come back through the program or a related program in 5 or 10 years and have the same issues, and come through again 10 years later and have the same issues. And we felt that that's because they're not keeping their eye ahead of their target. They're always dealing with the immediate problem and not seeing how the world around them is changing so that they can be shooting ahead of the curve and looking at where they will be in 10 or 20 or 30 years. The way that futurists begin to get people to think about these forces is a diagram that we call the cone of plausibility. What futurists typically say is, here we are in the present, and we know pretty much what's happened in the past. Now, of course, those of you who are historians will immediately jump in and say that's not true. The farther we go in the past, the less we know about it. But at least theoretically, it's already happened. It's set in time. Somebody who magically could go back in time could say, here's what was true. And if this is us right now in the present, and this is us tomorrow, it's probably going to be a lot like today. We don't have time for things to change too much. Next week, it might be a little different. Next month, it might be a little more different. But if you jump out 7 or 10 or 25 or 50 or 100 years, the farther out you get, the more things have had time to become very different, to diverge from the path that connects the past with the present and projects into an expected future. Now, there are limits to what could happen. We're not going to suddenly invent teleportation and go halfway across the universe. Most people probably say that faster than light travel is impossible. Maybe it's not, but for now it seems to be impossible, so that's probably outside the limits of plausibility. We might figure out how to live to be a healthy 150 years old. That's inside the limits of plausibility. Most people would say we probably can't be immortal, so that's probably outside the limits. And as I said, you can invent new technologies like teleportation or faster than light travel, or maybe even one day immortality, so the limits of plausibility get broader and broader as you go out in time. But the important thing to remember is that within the limits of plausibility, whatever those limits are at a given point in time, we could end up anywhere in these futures. We could end up in scenario B, we could end up in scenario C. This is what we usually plan for. We expect that the present's going to be just an extension of into the future, and this is where we're going to end up, and this is what we write our plans to accommodate. The problem is those plans are often so rigid that we don't have a contingency that would allow us to thrive here, here, or here, if that's where we end up. And often we forget to put our vision in this map, to say this is where we want to be. Now, how could we get, instead of here, influence the line to end up here? So what we're going to do in this level is explore the forces that shape this path into the future. That might mean that it goes this way, that might mean it veers off course, and how we could manipulate that path to try and end up with our vision. There are three forces of change, or drivers of change, that influence that path into the future. There are trends, things that change relatively slowly and continuously over time. They might change direction after a bit and go up for a while and then go down, but generally you can track patterns from the past and project them into the future. And that creates what we call plausible futures, things that you could forecast. If the world has been slowly warming over the last 100 years, we forecast that the world temperature will be an average of X degrees higher in 100 years. That's a forecast. There are events or discontinuities, things that happen suddenly and can knock us off course, and that creates possible futures that could happen if that event occurs, and that's why we write scenarios, to explore potential futures that could be created by events interacting with trends. And then there are choices, which are intentional discontinuities, which we can try and figure out how we could make the path into the future go this way or that way and result in a preferred future that reflects our vision. So these are the three forces that we're going to be exploring in this level, and afterwards we'll be segueing into exercises that help you create those forecasts or scenarios or visions to see how you can try and either anticipate where you may end up in the future, several different potential futures, or where you want to get to and how you can make choices that intentionally take us in that direction.